Um, Hello, my name is Tucker Marder. Thank you guys so much for being here on a sunny Sunday morning in a darkened room to hear me talk and watch a film with me. Thanks to the Hampton's Documentary Film Festival as well for inviting me to speak. I really appreciate it. Thank you. And lastly, I should also apologize if my voice sounds a little tight. My 12-year-old nephew last night, he's learning jujitsu, and he was practicing chokeholds on me. And so I fear that I might have been injured. Okay. Yeah, so I thought I'd take this opportunity to share a project I've been working on for a while with you guys called the Folly Tree Arboretum. I'm an artist, and I consider the Folly Tree Arboretum one big art project. But in the past, I've worked with ducks, shrimp, flamingos, sharks, scallops, and it's been sort of like a long-term artistic goal of mine throughout my career to develop and promote an exuberant environmental ethic. This idea, to try to figure out a way to talk about nature and the environment that employs humor and the imagination and doesn't make you want to jump out a window because it's so depressing. Yeah. What is the Folly Tree Arboretum? Okay, so the Folly Tree Arboretum is a cultural archive of trees, living trees, dedicated to environmental or ecological storytelling. I started in 2013. As some of you may have known, my parents run a landscaping business in Hampton called Marders, and I sort of grew up in this sort of this microcosm out here of people who can afford to move large trees. This idea that you could pay for time essentially and make your property look like it's been around for a while. And through growing up adjacent to this tree nursery, I gained a sense or like an intuition about this idea that a tree is just as much as a tree is a biological entity, it's a cultural entity that sort of participates in this dense network of historical, evolutionary, economic, and societal meaning. Here are some trees participating in various forms of meaning. But yeah, in 2013, I started planting trees behind my parents' barn. I really didn't know what I was doing at first. I was just, plopping redwoods next to dwarf trees, and it was a way to sort of, remember their names. A tree would fall off of a truck or be sick or scrappy, and I'd plant it behind the barn and try to sort of nurse it back to health. And in this way of seeing it every day, I learned its name and I learned its characteristics. And to me, it started to develop into this like sort of cast of characters that this idea occurred to me that an arboretum could be a site of cultural production just as much of a site as, botanical or horticultural production, that those two things could be relatively interchangeable. So I'll start to introduce you to some of the trees at the Arboretum. At first, the idea was kind of like, I thought the Arboretum should be all trees that were just funny-looking trees, that it would be an Arboretum dedicated to humor. And so it was kind of like using the aesthetics of trees to sort of introduce people to the science behind them, or the sort of what made them look silly or funny or interesting. And I found that weeping conifers in particular are some of the most charismatic trees on earth in my mind. This is Picea omarica, or Serbian spruce pendula bruns, and every time I give a tour of the Arboretum, somebody has a new association of like snuffleupagus or a llama, and that this is really endearing to people. This is a cultivar of Norway spruce called Picea abies cobra. It's an extremely weeping Norway spruce that if I didn't train it up like that, it would literally just be a puddle on the ground. It's an extremely lazy tree. Normally, a Norway spruce grows to be a 100-foot tall overstory tree, but this individual, says, I'm just going to stay on the ground. We have Magnolia macrophylla, which gets the largest flower of any tree in North America. Literally this 18-inch white bloom that reeks of fancy perfume. Magnolias evolved before bees existed, so the primary pollinators of magnolias are beetles. So you'll look in this giant flower when it's blooming for 3 days, and there'll be this crazy beetle orgy going on inside this giant flower. This is, if you're familiar with cryptomeria, this is Cryptomeria cristata, or coxcomb cryptomeria, that gets these growths called fasciations, which are a hormone imbalance in the cambium of the new growth of the tree that causes these sort of coral-like growths. And what's crazy about fasciation is that it can be, a lot of times it occurs in horticultural settings when somebody's spraying broadleaf weed killer, and if a little bit of weed killer gets on a plant and doesn't kill it, it's such a crazy substance that it can literally alter its genetics, so it'll start fasciating, and if you take cuttings from the fasciations, you can grow another tree that fasciates. So I don't like Roundup, but I do like the crazy growths it makes on cryptomerias. This is zigzag redbud, Cercis canadensis. Sugar maple, Acer saccharium monumentale, that grows perfectly vertically. I don't prune it, it just stays like a foot wide. This is a cool one. This is Pinus it's a graft hybrid of 2 different species of pine growing on the same stem. So this is Pinus parviflora, witch's broom, on top, and Weeping Pinus strobus, North American white pine, on the bottom. And this is sort of a folk art form that was invented by a nurseryman in the 70s named Gene Isley. He called it dansugi, but it sounds Japanese, but it's completely made up. The idea was that you would treat different cultivars of conifer as sort of like your palette to make these conglomeration conifers that exhibited traits from many different ones. So this is a dwarf Norway spruce that flushes pink flushing cones on a gold weeping skirt. So you get this pink polka dotted pom-pom with a gold skirt around it. Red and green Japanese maple on the same stem. This is a ginkgo called Ginkgo biloba chichi. Chichi relates to the slang term in Chinese for scrotum or breast, because it gets these crazy failed aerial roots that form these drooping masses. Another inspiration for the Arboretum was a guy, a self-taught surveyor named Axel Erlandson, who in the turn of the century had this place called the Tree Circus, where he charged people a nickel to come behind a fence and look at these trees that he had grafted into these fantastical shapes. Even today, people don't fully understand how he made some of the shapes he did, the curlicues and reversing polarity and all kinds of crazy stuff. So I've started to play around with much simpler versions of what he was doing. This is a hoop tree where it's 1 stem to 2 and then grafted back together to 1. I say, like, in 2 years we'll light it on fire and jump poodles through it. And then as the sort of Arboretum evolved, we started to get into this idea of story trees, or these trees that had some sort of narrative behind them that captured your imagination in some way. In my experience, as cliche as it might sound, it seems to me that one of the most effective ways to change human behavior is through storytelling. That a good story is actually the thing that makes people, you can't preaching to them doesn't work. You have to take them on a journey, you have to spin a yarn, you have to be an artist about it. And so I thought if I could gather these trees with anthropocentric stories in one place, it would be like this trick to get people interested in trees or introduce them to trees when they wouldn't normally be interested. So that sort of started with this tree. If you're familiar with the movie Shawshank Redemption, there's a famous tree in Shawshank Redemption. And I happened to be visiting my partner Isla in Ohio, and I heard that the tree in Shawshank Redemption had blown over. And I was like, oh my God, wouldn't it be amazing to have a clone of this celebrity tree in the Arboretum? So I raced over there and I tried to get cuttings, and I entered into this long email back and forth with this very litigious lawyer who owned the property. And by the time I got permission, the tree was dead and the cuttings were not viable. But I learned two things from that. One is that you always ask for forgiveness, not permission. And then that set me on this path of looking for other trees with stories. So in the next couple years, I started to gather. We have a clone of a tree that went to the moon on Apollo 14. Astronaut Stuart Roosa took 500 seeds in a capsule to the moon, came back to Earth, and then planted them all over the country. And I found one outside an elementary school in Pennsylvania, and I went when nobody was around and took cuttings and grafted them. And so that my hand is pointing to the scionwood. I don't have time to go into the process of grafting, but basically, we'll talk more about that later. But we have a clone of a tree that in 1835, this guy loved this tree so much, he deeded the 8-foot circle of property that the tree was on to the tree. So it's a clone of the tree that owns itself. We have a clone of a ginkgo that survived the atomic bomb in Hiroshima. We got it from a clone that's in Yale's Peace Garden. We took a boat across, got in an Uber to the tree, got out and took cuttings and got back in the Uber and left. One of my favorite trees in the whole Arboretum is Maclura pomifera cannonball, or Osage orange cannonball. They get these, you may have seen these fruits, these giant neon green knobby balls that grow on Osage oranges, and you'll see them sort of like on sidewalks or on the sides of roads in the fall. But Osage oranges co-evolved with 13-foot extinct giant land sloths that were the only animals that over evolutionary time could eat the fruit and poop out the seeds and distribute the genetics of the tree. So what happened is people came along 10,000 years ago and killed all the land sloths, and so now 10,000 years into the future, this tree still has these evolutionarily useless fruits, or it's called an evolutionary anachronism. And I really love that about this tree because, it's great to get apples from your apple tree, that's all well and good, but this idea that the fruit leads this subversive existence where it rolls down hills in the parking lots and causes trouble, or kids will pick them up and throw them at each other, or we have a very rare female cultivar which gets Osage oranges 2/3 larger than the straight species, so 2/3 more useless. Does anybody know who the artist Alfonso Osorio is? You should. Alfonso Osorio was this amazing abstract expressionist artist who was an amazing artist in his own right, but also helped keep Jackson Pollock from drinking himself to death before he did, and made these really amazing assemblages and paintings and drawings. But he was never really fully well respected during his own lifetime because he was gay, Filipino, and independently wealthy in this 1950s macho abstract expressionist scene. But in the 70s, he started building this conifer collection in East Hampton called the Creeks. And the American Horticultural Society called it the 8th horticultural wonder of the world, because it was one of the largest collections of conifers all in one place. And he curated his sculptures into the trees. He painted his house black so that the conifers would show up better against the house. He put sewer pipes on dead trees with his sculptures. Here's a dansugi from the Creeks. And installing the Creeks was one of my parents' early jobs. Osorio was sort of obsessed with gold conifers, chlorotic conifers that keep a gold color all year round. And so my parents found this umbrella pine at a nursery in Connecticut that wouldn't turn green. It stayed this yellow chartreusey color all year round. And so they propagated it, named it Cydioptes verticulata Osorio's gold, and gave it to Mr. Osorio as like a thank you for giving them the job. But then in the 90s, the CEO of Revlon bought the creeks and ripped out most of the conifers. So it's been crazy. I've been looking for this tree for like 8 years, and I just found it approximately 3 years ago in a nursery in Oregon. So it's crazy I had to go all the way to the West Coast to find a tree that used to be right down the street. It's a lot of information, I'm sorry. We have a clone of a tree that Hitler and the German Olympic Committee gave to Jesse Owens at the 1936 Olympics. We have a tree that was transplanted from Martha Stewart's house. There's a seedling from the tree that supposedly Hippocrates taught medicine under 2,300 years ago on the island of Kos in Greece. We have a clone from the last living tree planted by Johnny Appleseed in Algo, Ohio. A tree from outside Anne Frank's window when she was hiding from the Nazis in the annex in Amsterdam. And a clone of Kadik Yas, or the golden Sitka spruce that was sacred to the Haida people in Haida Gwaii, or the western coast of Canada. It's a really crazy story, but in the sea of green spruces, there was this one 400-year-old, 100-foot-tall golden Sitka spruce, and it factored into a lot of the storytelling tradition of the Haida people. The sort of foundational story was that a little boy was disrespectful to nature, and as punishment, he was transformed into a golden spruce. And so supposedly the soul of this boy was trapped inside of this tree. But then in the 90s, not the CEO of Revlon, a disgruntled timber industry guy named Grant Hadwin swam across the river with a chainsaw and cut Kadik Yas down. He was obviously kind of mentally ill, but in his mind, it was actually a protest of the logging industry. His idea was that if I cut this freak tree down, people will pay attention to all the trees being clear-cut around it. I'm not saying I agree with him, I'm just saying that's what he was thinking. And so he got a court date set for vandalism and trespassing that was 30 miles across a sound from where he lived. And so he decided to kayak to his court date the day before, and he set out across the sound, and he was never seen again. They think he was either killed, or he flipped in his kayak and died, or some people think he's like still alive in an island in the Pacific Northwest somewhere. I'll just quickly share some propagation photos and information. We mostly focus on vegetative propagation as opposed to seedlings, because when a seedling is genetically random because it's created through sexual reproduction, which is relatively genetically random between the two parent plants. So similar to like a Fuji apple, the only way to get a genetically identical tree is to graft or root stem cuttings. So that means that it's literally the same individual, just growing again on its own roots. So all Fuji apples on planet Earth, all Cavendish bananas on Earth, they're all genetically identically the same individual, just propagated thousands and thousands of times. Here's some moon sycamores in the root cellar being grafted. This is what it looks like when you first take off the bandage. That's when you first graft. And then something else we've started to focus on is, if you've ever heard of a witch's broom. A witch's broom is a genetic mutation that occurs on a tree that if you take, it kind of looks like a little constipated mole on a tree, like a growth. And if you take cuttings from a witch's broom, you can get a dwarf or miniature version of the original tree. And when I was growing up, my dad would tell me these stories of these guys who would go out into the woods with shotguns, and they'd shoot witches' brooms out of the tree and graft up those cuttings, and then you could theoretically, it was basically inventing a new tree or a new cultivar, and this seemed like the closest thing to actual magic that I could possibly imagine. And all these people seem to have crazy names like Ziegenfuss and Spahn and Reese, and so I started looking for witches' brooms of my own and starting to propagate them. Usually you have to climb up in a tree to get them. And so here's a witch's broom growing in the Arboretum. And so when you take cuttings and you propagate it, you can name it whatever you want, like Chamaecyparis obtusa, Tucker's Little Fat Baby, or Kermit's Revenge, or whatever you want it to be. And so I did the paperwork a few years ago, and the new name of this witch's broom is Chamaecyparis obtusa narrator, because it's going to be the literal narrator in this traveling puppet show thing I'm building that'll be like the Arboretum, but on the road, so you don't have to physically visit the Arboretum to hear the stories of the trees. Here's all the propagated stuntmen. In case one dies, there's a backup. We've done a few landscape designs. This is a sketch that incorporates the Osage oranges for this. It's called the Osage Orange Hill, where you plant an Osage orange at the top of a mound, and then you get this sort of annual ritual of non-prescriptive play where the balls will roll down the hill in the fall, and it'll be turned into like this anarchy playground where kids, will throw them at each other or roll them down a hill or, yeah. This is a conifer puppet theater and petting zoo that was at Hayground Elementary School in Bridgehampton. There's different conifers planted for their tactile qualities around a really simple yew hedge. A puppet theater. We worked with an artist named Christina Salas to build this large scale, she calls them doll gardens or muñeca gardens, where with recycled fabric, she seeds these figures, and then over the course of the season, they sort of grow in with flowering plants. And then lastly, I'll just run through, the Folly Tree Arboretum is a 501c3 non-for-profit, so we do all kinds of wacky stuff, fun programming over the summer. I encourage you all to visit if you ever are around. We do all kinds of events, screenings, lectures, performances, there tends to be a lot of puppets for some reason. This is a really amazing Puerto Rican identical twin brother puppetry troupe called Pansali Creacion. This is Bread and Puppet from Vermont. We've had a live feed performance by a chicken that can play the national anthem. Every summer we do a clam party. It's our version of a gala where we basically have a big clam party, and we gamble on soil maggots. We race them so people can gamble and raise money for the Arboretum. We have this little 6-inch racetrack that we do a live feed of so you can see the results, and it's like, we also do a summer camp for kids where in 2 weeks kids conceive and make a film that has something to do with nature that screens at the Sag Harbor Cinema. We do an artist in residency program every summer where we have 4 to 5 artists in residence, all focused broadly on this idea of environmental storytelling. Yeah, that is the Arboretum. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Tucker. Are you going to take a few questions?
I'd love to.
Great.
I saw you first.
I have a mic for you that you can use. Here you go.
I just want to really, first of all, say fantastic. But tell us about the duck, please.
Yeah, I was hoping you guys wouldn't notice. We're working on a book right now, and those night portraits are going to be in the book, and it's really hard to get a sense of scale of a tree, and so instead of putting like a yardstick, the idea is that every tree will have a duck in for scale. It sort of purposely doesn't make sense. Yeah.
Hi there, this was phenomenal. You referred to a number of trees as being clones. What exactly does that mean when it comes to a tree? Clone. Yeah, so
it sounds much fancier than it is, but most plants that you eat and most plants that you buy to plant and look at are clones. So somebody found a tree that they particularly liked or a plant that they particularly liked, and they propagated it vegetatively, meaning that not from seed, that they stuck a cutting or grafted it or tissue cultured it so that like for example, if you took the seeds from an apple tree and planted those in the ground and waited 6 years for that apple to grow, that tree wouldn't have, if it was a Fuji apple, those wouldn't be Fuji apples because it's had a genetic mix between the tree that it got pollinated with. So the only way to control what you grow in the future is to graft or propagate that same flesh over and over and over, or again, basically. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah. So specifically in that case, the tree is in Amsterdam. It's outside the annex window. That tree blew down maybe 8 years ago. But before they did that, the Anne Frank Foundation spread clones around the world as sort of like a symbol of hope and prosperity and perseverance. And so I got a cutting from a tree that's actually under the Space Needle in Seattle. And because it's a clone, you can propagate it again, and it still carries those same genetics.
Do you sell some of your clones or seedlings or whatever for people to plant in their own yards, or what do you use them for?
So mostly as, like genetic backups, like I try to keep several on hand just in case the one that's implanted out dies. And we do, like, at the clam party, there's like a silent auction and people can...
Do you have a mailing list that we can get on so that we know when your events are?
Yeah.
And can people visit your Arboretum, or do you do it mostly for yourself, except for these events?
It's, so I give, basically what I do all summer is give tours. So it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. You can make an appointment on the website. If you make an appointment, I add your email to the list without asking you.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you.
This might sound silly, but do all the different species get along?
Yeah,
Do they all live well together?
okay.
I told you it was a silly question.
No, it's not a silly question. I think it depends the perspective you have on things. I think in 1,000 years, I don't know what's going to happen, but a lot of people think that, I don't know if this answers your question, but it feels a lot like running the Arboretum is like spinning plates. Like you plant a tree and it dies, or you got to water it or whatever. Things are changing a lot more all the time on my human scale than I necessarily can plan for in the future. So it seems like they're getting along is the answer, I guess. Yeah.
Good. Humankind should, watch that.
Yeah.
I just wondered about taking cuttings of trees. I've done it with shrubs, but how do you do it with trees, and particularly evergreens?
Yeah, it's basically you take cuttings when a tree is dormant. In most cases, you want to, for deciduous trees and conifers that we can grow. Most of them are taken when it's dormant, and you take basically a pencil's worth of growth, like a pencil long and a pencil thick. If you're grafting, sometimes bigger than that if you're rooting cuttings. It depends how vigorous the tree is. Some things like willows are notoriously easy. Like you could cut a branch off a willow tomorrow and stick it in the ground and it would turn into a tree next year. But things like oaks, some conifers are a little more finicky. One of the things I have is like a hot callousing pipe, which is in the root cellar. It's 50 degrees, and you have a bare-rooted plant that's asleep, and you have a scion that's asleep. You graft them together, and you stick the graft union in a warm pipe, and it heats just the graft union to 72 degrees, and it tricks the cells at that portion of the plant to wake up and knit and fuse before the roots and the rest of the scion know what's going on. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tucker. What a treat.